2,000 years later.
Wow. Okay, it's been a while since my last video. Welcome back to the BlizzConnect's channel, guys. To summarize quickly, where have I been? Moved countries, undertook new projects, and let's just say it's been a crazy 2 years, maybe even longer. But nevertheless, we are back. We're going to be sharing some great content with you guys with regards to game development, some of the things that I've been doing over the last 2-3 years, and I'm really excited to show you guys what it is I've been up to. But first and foremost, we're going to strike straight back into this new series that I'm going to be doing. We're going to be doing two different series, a roguelike based player as well as a turn-based game, very similar to Commandos, if you guys can remember that. So looking forward to teaching you guys how to build that from scratch. We're going to be making use of Construct 3 in this demonstration, and without further ado, let's just crack straight in. Okay, so to get started, I've gone ahead and made a new project. It's defaulted by 32 by 32. We're going to go ahead and add now a number of objects to get our player movement as well as gun movement. The first one we need to do is go ahead and add the mouse. This is just to purely get the cursor to be our point of aim when the player is moving. Next one we need to do is add the keyboard, and this is obviously for player movement. And then thirdly, we're going to need to go and add a number of sprites. Now the first sprite I'm going to add is I'm going to call this the player collision. So I'm just going to paint this for the sake of this demonstration, and then I will explain what it is, why I'm using this as a player collision. So I'm going to call this quickly for us player collision, and this just helps when you're using pathfinding and things as such, opposed to doing it on the animation, the collisions. It's just easier if you're using shapes. So I'm going to go and just set that quickly for us at 32 by 32 just to match the grid size just for now, and we can go ahead and add two other sprites as well. Now the next sprite I'm going to add is the character's animation. Now again, yeah, you can just use any form of free assets that you might have lying around, purchase, support the guys over at itch.io. I'll leave some links down in the description of where you can go. It's always great to support them. So I'm just going to go ahead and just drag in some assets that I have downloaded, and I'll just say import from sprite, and I'll say import, and I've got my little character here, and I'm going to go ahead and set this animation, you could say, to idle, so that we know that it's the idle animation. Right. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to put the click loop, because I want the animation to loop through the whole time when he's idling, and I'm just going to slowly bring the speed up to about 8 for the sake of this. Next one I want to do is right click. I want to say add another animation, and I'm going to call this the walk animation. Just rename that to walking for the sake of this demonstration, and I'm going to go ahead and just pull in again the same animation but just a walking version of it. So there we go. And this I'm not going to loop, but I am going to set it to 8 as well. It's going to work basically. Loop just means it's going to play it through, but I want it to work only once I'm simulating the walking. Alright. So now that we've got our character there he is, we need to go and add one more sprite, and we're going to just call this sprite, this is going to be our player gun sprite. So I'm going to go in and add one as well, and I'll just drag that across, and this will be our player gun. Okay, great. Let's just use that. Perfect. Okay, and I'm going to just size this down because it's going to look a little bit odd if it's that size. Let's make it about that. That should work. And I'm going to zoom in here and put this on the player. Yeah, maybe a little bit smaller as well. Maybe a little bit big. Okay, perfect. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and just take this off the layout view, because we're going to focus on the player. And we'll do pixel rendering later once we've set it on the project view. So don't stress too much on that. We'll smoothen it out in a bit. Okay, so we've got our 3 sprites. Now on the base sprite we need to do a number of things. We need to first add the behavior, which is a directional behavior. This is to give the player movement once he's moving. So now that we've got that, we're going to go ahead and set it to set angle to no, because I don't want this little sprite, once I've pinned it to here, to really move around in a strange angle, because I'm only going to work with the left and the right and an up and a down. And then I'm also going to set it to 4 directional for now, and I'm going to disable the default controls because I want to assign the keyboard object that we've added to this collision set. Okay, great. Then on these 2 sprites I want to go ahead and add a behavior as well, and that behavior is going to be the pin behavior. So I'm going to go ahead and just say add new behavior, and I'm going to say pin. There we go. And I'm going to do the same for the gun behavior. Now we're going to work with families and things as such because there are going to be a number of guns in this tutorial, I'm sure. But for now, for the simplicity, we're just going to build everything into the main event sheet as well as into the main view so that it's not too confusing and easy to understand. So clicking on the gun, I'm going to go ahead and click on behaviors, and I'm going to add another pin behavior. Right, fantastic. So those both have that. Okay, so now the next thing that I need to do is also just set an instance variable on this collision, and I'm going to go and do that and say add new instance variable. And the variable that I want to do here is a state, because we're going to create a state machine which basically handles most of the logic when the player is moving, when the player is standing still, and when the player is attacking. It just makes it a lot easier so that you can assign those animations accordingly, and just instead of having duplicate code, you want to recycle code. So state machines are great for that. I'm going to set that to string, and I'm going to click OK. So then we've got our first variable set. We could assign it to idle, which I'll do now, but we don't need to necessarily. We will assign it programmatically in the event sheet. Okay, fantastic. So there's our player, and last thing I'm going to do is just click on the collision, and I'm going to set this to initially visible, and I'm going to uncheck that because I don't want you to see that. That's just for behind the scenes and collisions in theory once we assign that correctly. Okay, over onto the event sheet. We need to do a few things. The first thing we need to do is just add a group just so that we can keep things clean. We're going to go with the player movement so that we know that it's all related to that. And underneath here I want to add a number of related keys when pressed to stimulate certain movement for the player. The first one's going to be keyboard. That's the object that we added on the right hand side, as you remember. I'm going to say when a key is down, and in this case it's going to be A, because I want to create W, because I want to simulate the AWSD keys on your left hand and the mouse on your right, obviously for those that are right-handed, for the movement of the player. You could use the up and down arrows, but I want to just use that because it just feels more natural. So I'm going to put that down as W. I'm then also going to just do one last thing, and that is add an event here, and I'm going to say on the player collision, I want to simulate that if this key is pressed, that this thing is moving. So in this case, I'm going to simulate the control, and I'm going to say it's moving up because that's the W. Right, fantastic. Then I'm just going to click on here, and I'm going to paste that 3 times just to speed it up. Right, so now that we've got our player movement in, we need to do another thing where we can check the state of the player. So in this case, we want to go add another event, and we're going to say on the player collision that if the player is moving, we want to set its state to walking, as we saw there. So in this case, I'm going to change the instance variable. So we're going to go player collision, and I'm going to say set the state, which should be a variable. Down below, you can say set value, and we're going to select the state string there, and we're going to say in this case it is walking. Right, fantastic. And then last but not least, we're going to use an else. So on this block, just right click and say add, and then go down below and say add an else. This means it's the opposite. So if he's not moving, set it to idle. So there I'm just going to copy that again, paste it down, and I'm going to make that idle. Right, so this we're going to use because now we know what state that this player is in to know what animation it is we need to play. Alright, so the next important thing is we need to pin the player as well as create the objects on start of layout. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a new event. I'm going to say system, and I'm going to go start of layout. I want to do a number of things. And the first one is I want to create the player animation object. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to say create object, and I'm going to select the player animation, and I'm going to set the layer to 0 because we've only got one layer at the moment, but we can change that later. I'll explain layers and functions and families, etc. So we're going to create the object, and I need to start the object on top of the player collision. So in this case, we're just going to say player collision. It should just prompt it once you start typing it to save you time. And I'm going to put this on the .x value as well as then player collision, and I'm going to set that on the .y. Now this will create the object on top of the collision block that is set to hidden. So if I go ahead now and click play, you will see the character doing the animation of idle because we've got that on a loop, there you see. But you'll notice he's not walking because we haven't pinned it. So behind the scenes, the invisible block is walking, but not the player animation. So let's go ahead and just do that as well. So once created, we want to then say player animation, would you go ahead please and pin this object onto another object. Now I'm going to use the object point because this allows us to get it more precise. So I'm just going to say onto the player collision, and for now that should be done. So if I play it now, in theory, we should have a moving character. Let's have a look. So there he is. A little bit fast, but nevertheless, the character is now moving. Fantastic. So next thing we need to do is do the same for the weapon. We need to go ahead and create another system variable, and we're going to create an object, and that'll be the player gun, and we need to do the same, and in this case we're going to add it to the animation. So we're going to go player animation, and we're going to go .x, and because I want this to overlap on the player animation, and we're going to go player animation .y. Okay, it just prompts it up for you, which makes it nice and easy. Fantastic. Okay, and I'm going to click done, and in theory now we should see the gun appear, and perfect. That'll work for now. And then we're going to also just pin it, because if I move the player, the gun will stay behind. So I'm going to go player, and I'm going to say player gun, and I want to pin that, pin to object with image point, and I'll explain the image point now to the pin to and player animation, image point 0. Perfect. So now in theory, if we keep going, we should see our guy with the gun. Cool. Now you'll notice a few things. One, it's over the eyes of the player, and we'll fix the blurriness just now. And then secondly, the weapon is slightly too high. So this is the point of the image point that we used, point 1. We can create a number of points. So what I'm going to do is go ahead now onto the layout again, and I'm going to click on the player. And here you'll notice a few things. That you've got what we call an image point. The one is the default is 0, and you can add a number. So you'll notice it's on the face. So if we go ahead and set this maybe here, and we'd have to do that for all the animations, but in this case you could just right click and say apply to all animations. It will then go and make it lower. So now it should be in the same spot, because that's an idle, and then walking should be similar on the belly as well. You can adjust each one as you see it fit to make sure that it gives you a decent sort of transition once playing. So I'm going to go ahead and play it now. It should be lower. Right, that's a little bit better. Again, the gun's too big, but I don't want to sit and do too much with regards to you know, like these little things, when this can all just be done off camera. Alright, so there's our player, and now we need to do is get this gun to move based on the object that we added right in the beginning, which is the mouse. So in this case, we go back to the event sheet, and we're going to add the every tick. So yeah, we're going to go system again, and we're going to go every tick, and we basically want to angle the player gun towards the mouse. So we're going to say set angle towards a position, and that position being the mouse dot x, and then also the mouse dot y. Right, now this should rotate the gun based on where the mouse is. So let's go and do that. Alright, fantastic. So now when my player is moving in the roguelike, he can shoot the little enemies all behind. But you'll notice now that it's going upside down, and it's not lifting the sprite of the play animation, and looks a little bit odd. So we're going to go ahead and just fix that as well. So there are a few things that you can do to address this. We're going to use the mirror feature, because we've only got a left and a right. I don't see the need for us to go too in depth with regards to creating a left sprite and a right sprite, when we can just use the same sprite to achieve, in theory, the same outcome. So in order to do that, we need to compare two values. So again, on the every tick, we're going to add a sub event, because it needs to happen on every tick. We're going to go say add sub event, and we're going to click on system, and we're going to compare two values to know which is basically the left and the right. So in this case, because we're working with the mouse cursor, we're going to go the mouse.x, which is the vertical. We want to know if it is greater than the player's collision. So that is your base, the player collision. So if I'm on the left hand side of this player, I want to know what I need to do. So I'm going to go and set that. Click done. And now I'm going to in and add the player animation. I could say if it's on the left hand side, in this case, sorry, on the right hand side, don't do anything. So we're going to set mirrored. So let's get mirrored. I want to say set mirrored to not mirrored. In other words, don't do anything. And then I'm going to add an else, because I wanted the opposite. I'm going to say else, and you guessed it, I'm going to set it to mirrored. So let's have a look and see what that looks like now that our player is intact. So if my mouse cursor is on this side, it's fine. If he goes this side, you'll notice now that he looks to the left and he looks to the right. We need to now do the same for the gun. So let's go back to the gun, and all we're going to do here is just copy this, and we're going to just edit that and click back, back, And here we're going to use something slightly different. Here we're going to use the flipped. So we're going to say if it's to the left, don't flip it. So if you set flipped, and I'm going to say not flipped, I'm going to click done, and then down below copy paste, and I'm going to set that to flipped. Now we should have a clean, if I'm left or right, the gun shouldn't do anything funny. So there it is there, I'm moving, to the left, I'm moving, and that looks perfect. That now looks a lot better. So when I'm running around the roguelike, I can shoot it and the animations don't look funny. Okay, so that is the first and foremost setting up the base player for its idle animation. Now, because we've added what we call the state engines, we can now begin to create what we call the player state, which is quite a critical thing. And to do so, we need to check to see at what state the player is in, and then to do, you know, whatever it needs to happen in that state. So if he needs to fire a weapon, if he needs to pathfind, if he needs to, and that's the beauty about states in theory. It gives you the ability to understand where the player is at, what it's doing, and what you need to do when it's in that different state. Okay. So before we tackle we can tackle the walking, which is over here onto the, we can just use the walking animation, but I want to put the animation in the actual state events when we make it. But for the sake of this tutorial, let's just go ahead and add it here, and we'll shift it accordingly. We're going to go set the animation to walking. That should just pop up for us. There we go. So if it's moving, set him to walking. And if he's not in idle, set him to idle. Now, I don't like putting, like I said, the animations here. I want this to be in a state machine, and we're going to tackle that in the next video, understanding the state machines. But for now, it should just be clean. Let's have a look. Just that you understand the broad concept. But if he runs, you'll see now he's got a little running animation. And if he stops, he goes up and down, which is his little normal animation. There we go. That's looking pretty great. All right, fantastic. Right, so the next thing we want to achieve now is the firing of the weapon. We want to just get the core basics in, and then we'll begin moving this all in its respective places. So I'm going to go ahead and just move everything that is system related. I'm going to move to the top, because that's just always the best practice for now, and it just gets it out the way for me. Okay, that's your player movement, as well as the every tick events. I'm just going to move to the top. Great. Now we're going to add a new group, and I'm going to bring in the gun movement. You could say the gun functions. Let's just call it gun for now. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is, if we are going to use the left mouse button, which is left mouse put down, so we're going to go mouse, and we're going to go on click. We could do this on click, or we can just do this on button is down, in case we want to create burst fire. So let's just do, if button is down, we're going to go left. We're going to then want to do certain events. What we need to do is, again, create a new sprite, and this is going to be our bullet sprite. So we're going to type in sprite again, and we're going to drop that here, and we're going to get the circle event. Let's go ahead and just make it a circle, a little round circle. Let's chase that straight in. Let that be our little bullet. Let's go ahead and make that slightly smaller. It's going to look a bit odd. It's too big. About works. And let's go ahead and call that bullet. Great. Now we've got a bullet. Make it a little bit smaller so it doesn't look too funny. Great. The next thing we need to do is add the bullet behavior to this bullet. And all you do is check on the bullet, and you're going to come down to the behaviors once again, and you're going to add the bullet behavior. And this we will just obviously manipulate in the events. Right. So now that we've got the bullet behavior, this allows this to act like a bullet. Now, before we code up the functions for the bullet, there's a number of things that we also want to do on the gun to make it look more natural. We want to go ahead and add another image point that we spoke of earlier. I want to create a right click and say add new image point. And I'm going to go ahead and just click it right over there, because I want the bullet to spawn from this area, not from the middle of the gun. So we're going to be using image point 1 for that. Okay. So now that we know that that is there, the next thing we need to do is go back to the event sheet. We've got our on left mouse button. We first need to do a number of things. We need to go and spawn on the gun. So we're going to say player gun spawn. Let's just type in spawn. Another object. And here we're going to choose bullet. And its layer is fine, but here we're going to set it to the image point 1. Everything's on the base layer. Okay, so let's have a look and see. That should give us the bullet. It should do something funny, because we haven't set the speed or velocity. Okay, looks a little weird, but we'll sort that out. Great. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to add another obstacle because I want to see when I'm shooting against it. I'm going to add another sprite just for the sake of this demo. I'm going to bring it down here. I'm going to give it a color. Let's make it purple. Click OK. I'll make this nice and thin so that we know what we're doing. And I'm going to just call that wall for now because I want to give it the solid behavior. And I'll call that wall so that we can destroy the bullet, as well as the bullets out of layout we can destroy it. I'm going to give that a behavior quickly. I'm going to call that solid. So it just acts as a wall now. Fantastic. And I'm going to go back to the event sheet. So yeah, we're going to go again and just add a new event. We're going to say bullet, and we're going to check to see if it is on step. It means it's now in movement. We want to then add a sub-event. Say add sub-event. And if it collides the bullet itself, bullet is on collision. Let's go ahead and just make overlapping for now. Is overlapping another object, which is going to be the wall. Go ahead and just destroy it. Now, yeah, you can feed in all your different, enemies, your ores or whatever other conditions. That if it's hitting an enemy, begin the enemy process of deducting, enemy hurt, etc. But we'll get to that, and I'll show you how we'll recycle this correctly. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and say bullet destroy, and that should then destroy our bullet if it collides with the wall. Let's just make sure that that is working. Great. Now you'll see it's colliding at the wall. Now you'll notice that there's a separate bullet coming there as well. That's only because the object is placed outside of the object view, and you're going to want to destroy that prior. But what I like to normally do is move all these objects to its separate object sheet. That way it's easy to control and better practice as well. So just for this case, I'm just going to go bullet, and I'm going to say is in fact not is outside of the layout. Is outside the layout. You can just destroy, and I'm going to copy and paste that and just put that there. Okay, so in theory now we should just have one shot. Let's have a look, and there it is. Right, so now we know the gun's working, but if I hold down the mouse button, you'll see that it's going to spam it. Okay, now this is fantastic because you can use this as an element in your game to control the rate of fire. So the next thing we're going to want to do is go again back over to the layout, click on the player gun, and we're going to want to add an instance variable. Now the instance variable that we're going to add here can be a number of things, but the one we're going to use specific is going to be the speed of the rate of fire. So let's go ahead and add a new instance variable, and let's call it speed. It'll be a number. Again, we can do the same, which we'll be adding. I might as well just add it now, and that's going to be ammo. We'll add another instance variable, which will be the ammo, to count if how much ammo is left in the gun, what's the current ammo, etc. I might have to just change that to current ammo, but let's go with ammo for now. So we've got those two variables, which is fantastic. Now we need to basically limit the event that we've just created based on the speed of the weapon. So I'm going to click back onto the weapon itself. I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.2. Let's have a look and see what that does. And then over on the event of the left mouse button, because that's our, you could say, top end event, you want to go ahead another event, another condition, and that condition is going to be every second, and you're going to want to then determine the speed of the weapon by actually placing that global variable. So we're going to go player gun. This is the nice thing about instance variables. It becomes dynamic. And you're going to go dot, and then in this case you're going to see there's ammo, but we're going to be looking for speed. So type in speed, and now we've got the speed of the weapon. So it will only spawn based on the speed that you set. So this allows us later down the line, if we create a dictionary or an array of all the guns, as the, you could say, waves come in of the enemies, you're buying items, you're picking up certain abilities based on your progression in the game itself. You can then modify this as you go. So this is quite cool. So let's go ahead and just test that now again. And you'll notice now it's a single rate fire. And if you spam it, it will. But if I hold it down, it'll always just be that single rate fire. Right, so there we go. So now we've got our player, we've got our gun movements, we've got our little guy doing his animations. Obviously we can set that a little bit slower. Again, we will just go over to the player collision, and we can click on player collision, and we can say, look, max speed needs to be 100, and accelerate, let's say 300, and down to about 250, so it doesn't look too quick when he speeds off. Again, you'll play with that, what you prefer in terms of your speed and so forth. Alright, but there it is, a little bit more natural. He runs around, he shoots, and the next thing that we're going to be doing in our next tutorial will be the bullet collision effects, just to get that basic juice going from the word go. We'll be focusing specifically on families and introducing recoil as well as screen shake, and then maybe just gun reload as well. And from there on, we'll move on to the enemy AI and a state machine that you guys can then have a look at. Vastly different enemies on spawn and passing dynamic values across, not just having one enemy but multiple enemies of different behaviors, but also recycling code. So this is a little bit messier. We're going to show you how we're going to clean this up and how we'll move this to global spreadsheets, and how we control our code so that it doesn't become a spaghetti overview, that you've always got control of what it is that needs to change, and then also making use of what we call, recycle code, that it is used in your game, reducing the amount of events and making your game very dynamic. Guys, that's it for this video. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to having you guys on the next one. If you could hit the subscribe if you're new here, and also the little notification bell, it gets the old YouTube, you could say, algorithm going again, and I would mostly appreciate it. Get you guys in the next one.